First, I'd like to introduce Annie Bomke. Annie is a literary agent with over a decade of experience in the publishing industry. Her clients include the Macavity Award-winning crime writer John Copenhaver and the Barnes & Noble best-selling cozy mystery author Libby Klein. She represents a wide range of projects from hard-nosed business books to otherworldly historical novels. Annie has loved the publishing industry since her internship at Zoetrope All Story, a literary magazine founded by Francis Ford Coppola. Authors have called her the pH test for good writing and a bedrock for literary quality control. You can find her at www.abliterary.com. I'd also like to welcome Hollie Kammier. Hollie is the international best-selling author of Kingston Court, as well as Lost Girl, a Shelby Day novel, and Choosing Hope. Co-founder of Acorn Publishing, the UCLA honors graduate, is an accomplished writing coach and a former journalist who has worked everywhere from CNN in Washington, D.C., and KCOP TV in Los Angeles, to the NBC affiliate in small-town Medford, Oregon. The California native and mother of teenage boys lives in San Diego, close to her friends and family. You can visit her online at www.Kammier.com and www.acornpublishing.com. And you should find those links in the Facebook comments below if you didn't catch them. I know I speak quickly. Jennifer Thompson is a personal branding expert, digital marketing strategist, and host of the Premise podcast. She is an author and speaker who delivers strategy-rich content and actionable tools that educate and empower authors. She and her husband, Chad, co-founded Monkey See Media in 2004 and have been creating award-winning book cover designs and author websites ever since. They specialize in author services that integrate digital marketing strategies and engage readers all over the world. She is also the co-founder of San Diego Writers Festival, serves on the board of the San Diego Memoir Writers Association, and is currently working on her own coming-of-age memoir. For author services, visit monkeyseemedia.com, subscribe to her blog at jenniferthompson.com, and listen to the podcast at thepremisepod.com. And last but not least, we have Brooke Warner. Brooke is the publisher of She Writes Press and Spark Press, president of Warner Coaching, Inc., and author of Write On, Sisters, Greenlight Your Book, What's Your Book, and 3 books on memoir. Brooke is a TEDx speaker, weekly podcaster of Right Minded with co-host Grant Faulkner of NaNoWriMo, and the former executive editor of Seal Press. She writes a monthly column for Publishers Weekly, and you can find her at www.brookewarner.com. Thank you all so much for being here. We're really excited about this panel.
Yeah, welcome, guys. So just so you know, the way today is going to work is we're going to be giving specific time, like about 5 or 6 minutes to each one of the panelists so they can go a little bit deep into the part of publishing that they're speaking on. So the first person we're going to focus on, and then we're all going to come together, and then we promise we're going to do Q&A questions. So first we have, we're going to focus on Miss Annie Bomke. Annie is going to be talking to us about traditional publishing. And so, Annie, I'm just going to let you give an overview, and I think some of the questions that we had were, what are the, people were asking, what are the benefits, and, you know, what are some of the downsides of traditional versus what are some of the benefits, a little bit of a pro and con, wondering if you can speak to that.
Okay, sure. So should I start with just the should I start with that, or should I start with?
Yeah, how about just like an overview of what traditional publishing is?
Okay, so traditional publishing involves first getting an agent, and then that agent submits your manuscript to publishers. So the agent is, they handle the business side for you, so they handle the contract, they make sure you get paid, they make sure that your publisher fulfills its obligations, and they do the submission process for you, because a lot of major publishers and then some of the bigger indies don't take submissions unless you're represented by an agent. So for like the major publishing houses, agents are sort of a screening process for them as well, just because they don't have time necessarily to read everything that everyone's written. You know, if it's submitted by an agent, they may think that it's been worked on a little bit more than, you know, something that hasn't been submitted by an agent. So that's why they only work with agents for the most part. So that's the traditional publishing path. Usually working with an agent, the first thing you do is you submit a query letter to the agent describing your book. But every agent has kind of a different initial submission package that they want. Like, I always ask for a query letter synopsis in the first 2 chapters. I'm all about the writing. So it's sort of like a query letter can only tell me so much. I would much rather see a little bit of somebody's manuscript and see if I'm connecting to the writing.
So right off the bat, you want to see the writing, because I know some agents don't want that. They want to. So how do you know what an agent wants?
You go to their website. That's the most important thing, and just follow their submission guidelines. And just doing that one little thing shows that you're professional. So I've seen a lot of people who just like send me a link to a website where they have their writing. And, you know, one thing that people don't think about is that we're receiving emails from a stranger. So we're going to feel strange clicking on strange links or, you know, opening up strange documents and stuff like that. Because you don't know if it's going to lead you to a virus or whatever. So in terms of like the pros and cons, I'd say the pros would be that you may not be able to get published by a major publishing house without an agent. And so I guess a pro of traditional publishing is that you're more likely to see your book in a bookstore. So some of the distribution, it can be hard for self-published authors and then some indie press authors to get their books distributed widely to bookstores. So that is a pro to traditional publishing. And traditional publishers, a lot of times they'll help somewhat with the marketing as well.
Why would you want to work with a major publishing house? Give us a little bit of that understanding of that.
I mean, I think that a major publishing house can get you recognition in terms of getting reviews from major publications, like the New York Times and what have you. I think that it can, you know, again, get your book into bookstores that may be harder to do. I think that, you know, sometimes it just kind of looks nice. Certain publishers have kind of a long publishing history. And, you know, like I have friends who just love Scribner as a publisher. I'll be honored to be published by Scribner just because of its rich history. So, you know, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why you might want to work with a major publisher.
Okay.
And then also you might get an advance. That could be a lot of money.
That's a big, that's a good one. Yeah.
You know?
I have a quick question. Are there any costs that are associated up front with traditional publishing?
No. So if an agent says to you that there are fees you have to pay up front, that agent is not a legitimate agent. And so the only costs I've really seen with traditional publishing is there was one time when we were sending out a cookbook, and this one publisher who was kind of interested in it said, okay, the author would have to buy like 2,000 copies in order for us to commit to publishing this book. So they expected the author to you know, make a big purchase in that case, but otherwise, no.
Another question that we received a lot of interest on is about time.
Yeah.
So how long does it take on average? 'Cause you described, you know, the process first, the query letter. So they need to get to you, to an agent that says yes, but then that's, you know, half the game, right? Then you got to go and pitch it to a publisher. Just so people have a sense of what's the time like if you decide to go traditional, about how long from when you sign a client to when they might see it in their book in a bookstore.
So it really varies because there's a process that needs to happen from that point on. Like a lot of times I will work with authors to edit their book before I send it out to publishers. So that editing process, I'd say it's taken me anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 months. And so it varies book to book. And then from there, there's the process of selling the book, which I've sold books in as quickly as 3 weeks and as long as 4 years. And then from there, to see it in a bookstore or to see it published, publishers often ask for 18 to 24 months from the time that they make the book deal to actually publishing it. I've seen publishers do it faster, like 9 to 12 months. But kind of in the overall broad lines here, the fastest I've ever taken an author from signing them to their book being published is about 1.5 years. And that's including the publishing time. And probably the longest is about 5 years.
Okay.
It's a big range. It's a big range, and it is a lot of time.
Great. Anastasia, I know you wanted to ask about
I
Wright.
had a question. One of the issues that I know is that sets the different paths apart is the amount of control that an author has over the process. In terms of book design and things of that sort, how much control does an author have in the traditional publishing route? And how many of their rights do they retain in that kind of situation?
So in terms of editing, most publishers are very flexible in terms of editing, that, the editor will have feedback of some kind that they want the author to address in some way, but they may not be wedded to exactly how the author addresses it. And so they allow for more back and forth in that. And ultimately, they just want the author to be happy, and they want to have something. I mean, they don't typically take on things that they know will need a lot of work. I think that's number one. In terms of cover design, most contracts, most publishers will offer an agent cover consultation, which means that they will send the cover to the author and get feedback from the author, and then often will make changes based on the author's feedback. But if they kind of reach an impasse with the author, then they will go with what the publisher wants. And it's about the same for titles. They want both the author and the publisher to be happy with the title, but generally authors don't have control over that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
It does. Thank you.
And so the last question I wanted to ask you is, Elise brought this up earlier. You said that you work with an author on editing.
Yeah.
So is that like you personally are helping to edit it? Are you connecting them with an editor? Is that normal? Is that common to expect an agent to help with the editing?
So every agent varies on how much editing they do and if they do editing. Some agents just don't do it, and they, like you said, they connect an author with a freelance editor to do the editing. I do editing. I don't know, honestly, I don't know how common or uncommon it is. We always did editing at the agency that I came from, that I started at. And so it's one of those things when you have an initial phone call with an agent and talk about kind of what the process is the agent, you can also ask them if they don't volunteer this themselves, but the agent will probably tell you their process and whether or not, how much editing they expect and how to go about it.
Great.
So it varies.
So that was the basic on traditional publishing. Now we're going to move to Brooke Warner of She Writes Press. Hi, Brooke. Seen you in a while. Good to see you. In our original envisioning of the festival, it was a date that you couldn't make it, so we're
there's a pro.
Yeah, that's one thing. We get to have you at the festival this year. So Brooke, if you wouldn't mind giving us a little overview of how you see hybrid publishing, just some of the nuts and bolts, and then if you want to talk about pros and cons, that would be awesome too.
Yeah, absolutely. So hybrid is, in fact, it's been around for a long time, but I think in recent years, it's come onto the scene in a more meaningful and maybe more professional way. An attempt to professionalize hybrid publishing has been underway. A hybrid publisher is basically a press. It functions in many ways like a traditional publisher. However, it's author subsidized. And so it is something between self-publishing and traditional publishing, and that's why it's called a hybrid. And so the fact of it being author subsidized means that the authors do typically have more creative control, and it's a bit more of a collaborative process. And also, because the authors invest, they get a much higher royalty. So the royalties that we pay are 60% of net to the authors on print and 70% on ebooks, which is significantly higher than traditional publishing, as it should be, because the authors are investing in themselves. Our presses, my two imprints, She Writes Press and Spark Press, also have traditional distribution, which I think is a very important thing that sets us apart. And I was part of standardizing what hybrid is through the Independent Book Publishing Association and, Independent Book Publishers Association. And we decided at the end of the day not to require that any hybrid has to absolutely have traditional distribution. And the reason for that is because while it is very important, and I would argue more so for some authors than others, there are many authors who don't necessarily need traditional distribution in order to succeed. Our authors, in my opinion, do, because we publish mainly novelists and memoirists and people who write genre fiction. And I think for people in those categories, traditional distribution and traditional reviews, really, it's the difference between making or breaking your book, actually. Mm-hmm. And so in that way, I always envisioned that our presses would be a way for authors to have a shot, like to play in the sandbox with traditionally published authors, basically. And one of my original goals has always been to level the playing field. So we do have a submissions process, and that's another aspect. So hybrid really does have a lot of things that differentiate it from traditional publishing. And at the same time, I like to tell people we're not trying, I'm sorry, did I say traditional? I meant a lot of things that differentiate it from self-publishing. We're more like traditional in our structure, but we are not trying to be a traditional publisher either. And so I think that's the important part. It is kind of decidedly an indie and a third way to go. Should I keep going with pros and cons?
Yeah, please do.
The pros, I think, are some of the things that Annie mentioned. Distribution is a big deal for certain authors. Again, I think it's important that people understand not all authors need it. Like if you're a speaker, for instance, and you're selling most of your books at the back of the room, or you're a coach.
Can you explain distribution? I know that that's something that people get confused about.
Yeah, like in the shortest nutshell ever, because it's such a big topic. It really is just the pipeline by which your books get into the marketplace. And so if you are a self-published author, you put your book up, available for sale on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. That doesn't mean that it has the mechanism behind it to push books into the marketplace, nor that it's easy for bookstores to get the books. And so that's the main thing with traditional distribution, is that it really makes the bookstore go, oh, cool, just click, got it. And they don't do that quite so easily for self-published books for lots of reasons. So it's kind of like this machine that's just like grinding in the background. And authors, I think, often don't totally understand its value until they are not getting the benefits that it gives. And so that's a big pro, in terms of what we offer. I also think, a lot of the things Annie said, our reputation, we're not as old or established as Scrivener, but or Random House or whoever, but we have been around long enough that the bookstores know who we are. Our quality is high. And so...
And you won an award.
Yes, we won an award.
That was very fun.
We were there together when your book won an award. Yeah. That's right. Those things matter in publishing, because when you're a self-published author and you come on the scene and you're like, hey, it's just me and this is my first effort, bookstores are going to be like, cool, we'll give you a shot, maybe.
Right.
Your local bookstore for sure, but not all across the country, not libraries, not, we sell into REI, we sell into all kinds of specialty stores. So it's just the pro is having a much bigger team behind you than, even if you have a team supporting you to self-publish, which is awesome, usually they're not a team that has the mechanisms of a traditional publisher, which I said, we're not a traditional publisher, but we have the mechanisms.
Does someone need to still have like a query letter? You know, what's the process? How do they start the process with you?
We do have a submissions process, and so that's on our websites. We have the two websites, each have their own URLs, and the submissions process is pretty detailed in terms of what we want. It does include a query letter and sample pages and other questions. And so we assess those manuscripts. We charge a nominal fee, like $30, I think, at this point, because you know, I have a team of people who reads those and gives very thoughtful feedback, you know, which, having come out of traditional publishing, I can tell you that's more than you'll get from most publishers unless you have an agent. You know, an agent will often be the reason why you'll get thoughtful feedback from an editor. But if an editor is getting something through the slush pile, they may or may not respond to you, or you may receive a form letter, or you may get an email from an intern, you know. And so what we really wanted to do was say, okay, we're going to really thoroughly read this and give you feedback. And, you know, hopefully that is a value regardless of whether people sign with us.
And then if you can talk a little bit to the costs of hybrid publishing, and does somebody need an agent to work with you, or is it a benefit that they have an agent? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I'll start with the latter question. I think most authors who publish with us who have agents are bringing their agents along. You know, no agent is saying, let's start with She Writes, because that doesn't make sense. You know, I mean, they're paying, right? So an agent doesn't make money unless an author makes money. So of course, the ones who end up with us who are agented are with agents who just are like, we tried as hard as we could. We couldn't sell it, you know, traditionally. We believe in this project. And so usually for the agent, it's a passion project. And then the author and the agent both want it. But most of our submissions, understandably, are unagented. And the costs at this point are $7,500 for the publishing package, which includes a long list of things that I won't tick off here. But I think importantly is, you know, all the cover design, the interior design, the proofread, you know, all of the things that a publishing house would offer you. And then of course, also that's for the distribution and the management of the title for the life of the book. So it is it's a big investment for sure. And it doesn't include publicity. So this is not a cheap publishing route, but I do think that the authors who do it, not everybody. I mean, I know there are some people who at the end of the day are like, that was a lot, but most people really think that the value, you know, is worth it in the long run for the access that they get and for how widely they're able to sell, you know, than what they might have been able to do as a self-published author.
Awesome.
I have two quick questions for you. The first one is, what's the timing like? Because we talked about timing with traditional. What's the timing like from the time someone, well, let's say even from the date that they submit the first manuscript or the sample to you to the time that they would see their book on a shelf, so to speak?
It is operating on a traditional book schedules because of our traditional distribution. We are working with Ingram Publisher Services, which is the traditional arm of Ingram. And so like right now we're acquiring books for spring 2022. If someone wanted to publish in fall of 2021, it's too late. You know, we're already, that ship has sailed and we're already working on those projects. So I joke to my project managers that we orbit around Ingram, and it's, you know, their timelines are our timelines. And so we're on a rolling submissions basis. And as soon as we close one list, we open the next one. So it's about 1.5 years out, which is really similar to what Annie said.
What was your other question, Anastasia?
Oh, my other question was, so do you guide your authors through this process, and how does that all work for an author? If somebody, a lot of our writers are new and they're, like Marnie said, they've got something, they're ready to go, but they don't know the next steps.
Yeah, I mean, when you enter into She Writes Press or Spark Press, it really is very much like a traditional experience because I modeled the whole thing off of my time in traditional publishing. You know, it's what I knew. I did that for 13 years. So the person gets a project manager, I'm the publisher, we give a schedule. It's very tightly driven, and I do a lot of author education and author webinars, and so there is nothing in this process in that sense that feels like self-publishing. We don't let authors design their own covers. They're not coming in and like doing stuff themselves. You know, they if some of the savvier ones might want more input, right? But whether they are debut authors or have a lot of experience, they're in a pretty tightly controlled environment, and on a really tight schedule with deadlines and driven by a project manager.
But I can say, because I've referred a number of people to you, that they love the covers.
Yeah.
They feel like they've had input, and we just saw another one recently, Lindsay Slaka's.
It's awesome. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So like, yeah. So sometimes I know that authors get nervous, you know, if you do get input and your covers are gorgeous.
Thank you. We have an amazing art director, so that's important. And I also think, you know, anyone that you're going to publish with, a hybrid publisher, a couple of points, like you should be able to speak to the publisher. If you can't get an appointment with the publisher, I would say that that's a red flag. Like, why can't you talk to the publisher? And number two is look at their books, buy their books, open them up. Do they look normal?
Right.
You know, you might not know book design,
where are the margins?
but you know what a book should look like. And if it has weird fonts or big margins or it's just not attractive, that should be a huge red flag. And then talk to other people who have published with that publisher. You know, I don't think that every single author just gives, you know, like perfect 10s to us. They usually have like a pretty, you know, we had an amazing experience and here were some of the things that were challenging. I don't ever say that this process is without its challenges. So I really try to help my authors set their expectations. So, but I do know that our authors really support one another and they help each other navigate the process. And so I am always saying, look, if you're on the fence and you don't know, talk to She Writes authors. It's a really, really good way to know whether you're going to sign with someone who's reputable.
Agree wholeheartedly. And to continue the discussion on hybrid, we want to bring in Hollie from Acorn Publishing. If you want to also give us a little bit about how your view of hybrid publishing, maybe how your model might differ a little bit, pros and cons, anything you want to say on hybrid. Welcome, Hollie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Marnie. It's a pleasure to be here. You know, every hybrid is run a little differently. I think Brooke covered the basics, especially what you're looking for when you go out to look for a hybrid. You want to make sure that they're reputable. You want to look at their actual books. You want to talk to some of their authors. We do things differently. We started this company, my business partner, Jessica, Terry, and I, as writers. We started it originally just for ourselves. And when our books did well, we kind of expanded it out to the public. But our goal was always writers the opportunity to get their books out there based on the quality of their writing, not just their platform or their star power, and to keep all of their rights and all of their profits at the back end. So that's something pretty unique about our hybrid is, you know, you're paying that same flat fee up front, but on the back end, you're getting to keep all of your rights and your profits. We have two experiences set up because we find some writers want a lot of control. And so we have an author-driven experience where we're still doing the cover, but we are allowing them to work with our formatter directly, for line edits directly, so that they are learning this entire process, because some of these writers want to go on and have a long career and kind of branch out on their own and self-publish on their own after that. We also have just as many writers, if not more so, that do not want to have to get into the inner workings of publishing. And so we have a publisher-driven experience where we handle all of that for them, and then we're updating them every week on where we are in the process. So those are some of the differences. Also, I understand the arguments for traditional distribution. We feel like as a newer company and the way things have been changing in the market, that's not the route that we want to take. It usually ends up costing authors several thousands of dollars in the beginning in order to pre-purchase those books, and then you've got your storage of the books. And so now that Ingram will allow everyone to kind of upload to Ingram, whether it's for traditional or non-traditional. We're able to get all of our books into bookstores across the country, including Barnes and Noble. So for us, this is kind of a newer way of doing it. I wouldn't say one is right or wrong. I'm just saying, you know, there's a lot of different styles when it comes to hybrid. It's a big category.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about the process? If somebody wants to, you know, the process, the cost, some of the nuts and bolts of going with
and
it.
the timing maybe too.
Yeah, the timing. Yeah, good call.
So our timing is faster. We are looking at around a 6-month timeline from when we begin to when we end the submission process. Anybody can submit either to our email or through our website. And what we're looking for in our query is really the basics. You know, what is the title? What is your genre? What is your word count? And then we want to look at those first 3 chapters first to get an idea of the writing, because that's what we're basing our decision on. And then if it looks good to us, then someone from our team reaches out to the writer and begins that process.
And what's your editing process, if there is one?
So there's a couple. If the book still needs content editing, then we do require that they work with one of our content editors to go through another content edit. If they are going with the publisher-driven model, then it includes all line editing.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So formatting, line editing, cover design, quite a bit of PR and social media ahead of the release. Very hands-on.
And what about the cost? I think that you said there were 2 different experiences.
Yes, there's the author-driven, which starts around $5,600, so it's a little less expensive at the beginning, going up to the publisher-driven, which is $7,400. However, I should say the price difference evens out in the end, because if you do the publisher-driven, we're doing everything for you. Whereas if you're doing the author-driven, we're taking the time to teach you how to do it. It's like going to school, but you're still going to need the formatting done. You're still going to need probably line editing done. And obviously the cover, that's included in it. But so the price ends up being about the same. It's really just, do you want to learn how to do all these things so that you become completely independent later on if you want, or do you want us to handle it all for you and just keep it?
And what about social media? I believe that, don't you teach an author how to get on social media, start to build a platform?
We do. We have, once they start in the system, we kind of work backwards. This is your release date. And then we put you into our automated process where you're getting emails every single week with automated documents on this is what you should be doing this week and this is how you want to be doing it. In addition to that, we are emailing each of our authors at least once a week and checking in on them. This is what you should have been doing. This is what should have happened. And we're teaching them the process. We also create a lot of graphics for them that we post on our own social media. We've started a book club. We've got over 1,000 members now. It's really neat. So each month, we offer one of our ebooks within Acorn Publishing for free to our members in exchange for them leaving a review.
Oh, that's great.
We all know that's word of mouth is really what makes a book take off in the long run. And so we're trying to offer as many opportunities to our authors to get their books into other people's hands and get those reviews out there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Holly. And now we're going to move to indie publishing with Miss Jennifer Thompson. If you want to give us just like a basic overview, how it works. And
Yeah. Thank you, Marnie. So, you know, and Marnie referred to it as indie publishing, and I really prefer indie publishing to self-publishing.
You taught me that.
I did, and I noticed that you were listening. Yeah, and you know, ultimately, you know, it's always been known as self-publishing, but it's such a misnomer because you really are not supposed to do it yourself. I mean, we talked about book design and branding.
Don't do that yourself.
In the previous session. Yeah, and hiring a professional to help you through the process is so important. So what I do is I shepherd people through the process of independently publishing their book. So what that means is they are the publisher and the author. So in terms of timing, people, when they come to me, it's usually because they want it out now. They've got this sense of urgency. I got to get my book out in 2 months. And I'm like, whoa, let's not do that. That's too soon. I mean, there's so many reasons to take your time. I mean, I think 6 months minimum to go through the process. And I say minimum because that's fast. So ultimately, the first thing we do is we find comparable titles. I mean, I literally walk them through the entire process. So comparable titles, we design the book cover, we design the interior, and there's a lot of costs associated when you're your own publisher that, people don't think about, like who designed that book. There's several layers of editing. One of the first things I do is I read the book. And in a lot of cases, I send them to you, Maureen, because they're not ready. They think they're ready, but they're not ready. And that's the beauty of a hybrid press is they're not going to put a book out into the world that isn't ready. So self-publishing got a really bad name because authors were just putting out crap books. They weren't edited. They weren't designed well. They didn't have all the elements that people expect in a book. Does it look normal, like Brooke said? So we ensure that happens. If the book's ready, does it need a line editor? We lay out the book, the interior, and then there's the copy reader, goes through at the very end to make sure that, the page numbers are in the right place, that the table of contents lines up, that the gutter is the right size. We make sure that it has the right genre. So placing the book in the right genre is huge. You're going to get that with a hybrid press. As an indie author, you need to know where to place your book. So we help them do all that research. It starts with comparable titles. And when I tell people to find comparable titles, I'm looking for 3 to 5 titles that have been published within the last 3 years. Believe it or not, I've had people come to me and say, this book published in 1989 is the perfect comp title for my book. And I'm like, no one cares. That the thing about a comp title is it helps you understand how to place your book. Genre, keywords, trim size. We help them determine, should the pages be white or cream? Should the cover be matte or gloss? And we print, there's 2 ways to print in independent publishing. You can go with an offset press where you print 500 to 5,000 books. And I know that She Writes Press goes with offset presses. You're going to get a higher quality book with an offset press, but you're going to pay less per book, but you have to buy a lot of books. And where do you put them, right? If you don't have traditional distribution, are they in your garage? So with indie publishing, we use print on demand. So what that means is on Amazon, if you buy a book, that book then gets printed that next day and shipped out to you. And that's what we like to do with our authors. Now, in some cases, we do go offset. With some children's books and cookbooks or coffee table books, we're just not going to get the quality we need out of a print-on-demand company. So we will go offset. So there's a lot of choices that need to be made. We look at distribution, we looked at printing, we look at trim size. You don't want your book to not fit in the genre. The other thing about comparable titles is it's going to sit on a shelf next to 3 to 5 other books. What size are those books? If books are all 6x9 and you went with a square title that's 4x4, it's going to stand out and look weird, right? We also look at what's trending in cover design. Doing the research is a big part of what we do to help independent authors. So anyone who's doing this on their own, you can totally do it on your own. You just have to get help. Brooke mentioned Independent Book Publishers Association earlier. It's IBPA-online.org. And you can get the answers to all of your questions to independently publish your book. You are an imprint, so you need a logo. An imprint logo, just like, Penguin has their penguin. So you need a logo. All those little things that go into play people don't think about. But you can get answers, join organizations, and talk to other people. I mean, we have Publishers and Writers of San Diego right here in town where people can go and talk to other indie authors who are doing it themselves or who have been through hybrid or went the traditional route. I mean, what an amazing panel we have here. Because Brooke, I know you were in traditional before, and then, you wanted to help authors get their books out into the world and you started the hybrid press. And Hollie, who actually helps people through the process and teaches them so they can do it on their own. I mean, This is what an amazing group.
I had the same thought. I had the same thought because, I think something that also happens, Jennifer and I experience, is that writers get scammed and they come and I spent $5,000 and I got nothing. For some reason, $5,000 seems to be the amount that people spend. And there's just so much misinformation, disinformation, people that don't have the writer's best
interests.
Yeah.
Which raises a question for me, Jennifer. How much should indie publishing cost someone? So if someone says, "Oh, they're gonna charge me $5,000 to review my," how would an author know what it should cost?
So I'll be honest with you. I think an author should be prepared to spend $20,000, and they don't have to. You can absolutely do it for a lot less. But if you're going to do it right and hire all the professionals, now I'm talking about from all of your editors, your cover designer, your interior designer, potentially a book shepherd like myself, and the website and marketing and publicity and paying for, entering awards competitions. You want to set aside enough money that you can do all those things. Because what happens is if you go to someone who's maybe a book shepherd and they say, okay, I'm going to charge you $4,000 to usher you through the process and you'll have a book. Halfway through the process, you realize, oh, I hadn't considered I need business cards or bookmarks. There's another $150. And, oh, I have to buy my own block of ISBNs. There's $250. And, those little things add up. And I need a website. And by the way, you need a URL. So, it's $20,000 seems like a lot of money. But in my opinion, if you're going to do it right, hire professionals to help you through each stage of the process to give your book the best chance. If you're hiring people to help you, that's what I see. Now, obviously, there are ways to do it for less. And honestly, it also depends on your goals. I think, Brooke, you mentioned back of room sales. If I'm a speaker and I want a back of the room book, maybe I don't need to spend that much to get a book that I can sell in the back of the room. Or maybe I just want a book that is available on Amazon, and then I can just literally go through Amazon. For us, we usher people, we encourage them to use 2 print-on-demand companies. There's KDP, which is Kindle Direct Publishing, and that's Amazon. And then there's also Ingram Spark. So KDP prints and ships all Amazon sales. Ingram Spark prints and ships all other books, because Ingram, and Hollie talked about this a couple minutes ago, will put all books that go through their system in the distribution list, the wholesale distribution list. So Barnes & Noble can order their book from the list. Now, as Brooke said, there's no sales, there's no pushing of it, right? So that's the difference between traditional and wholesale. But you need to have Ingram Spark and KDP, in my opinion, because KDP, if they see the book is ordered directly from them, on Amazon, they're going to print it and ship it out right away. It's always in stock. And then Ingram Spark, they're going to ship everything to Barnes & Noble and libraries and all other bookstores, because Barnes & Noble isn't going to order a book from Amazon. It's not going to happen. So people are confused by that. I have 2 printers. Yes, you do. But it's the same book. It's the same ISBN. You own the ISBN. You are the publisher. These are simply printers and distributors of those products.
So as you guys can see, there's levels of involvement, and having worked with lots of different writers, some people they want their hands in everything, and some people are like, I can't do any of this. I don't know what you're talking about. La 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 la.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I'm totally interrupting you. I'm so sorry, but you just reminded me of something. I judge book design. I'm a judge for the Benjamin Franklin Book Awards for the cover designs. Our books don't win book competitions. Do you know why?
Why?
Because the authors are involved. I'm sorry, authors, but when you're involved in designing your book, the book is not going to be as good as it can be. Because you have sacred cows.
Agree.
And that's why going to a hybrid is so good, or trusting your book shepherd to say, no, that's a bad cover. How is it that, I am so passionate about book cover design, but the client always wins. And so when you have someone in your court, listen to them. Something you said struck me, Marnie, so I interrupted you. So I'll pass it back to you. But I just want people to know, trust your professionals. You don't know how to design books.
And that's one of the things we wanted to do, was give you a shortcut to these professionals that we trust, that we've worked with all of these amazing women. I'm going to open up the panel now. We're going to be throwing out some Facebook questions, and feel free, anyone, to jump in if there's anything that you wanted to say, as you were listening to the panelists. I'll put that out to you. Is there anyone that had something I've been on panels where we're like, I just want to say this one thing.
Anything one of you want to add real quick?
No. Okay, so let's do some Facebook questions. Anastasia, you want to do some questions?
Yeah, so this is a question for Brooke. Does She Writes include line editing as well as proofreading and all the distribution and production tasks that you mentioned?
The line editing is separate. It's because we have a 3-tiered acquisition process, in essence. So we have authors, we put them on different tracks. And track 1 means they're accepted and ready to go. Track 2 means that we recommend a copy edit. And track 3 is that we recommend a developmental edit. And so if someone who's not a track 1 author in order to publish with us, they need to get a copy edit. And we will do that. We have a stable of editors, and so we can offer the bid, and they can go and get that done outside as well, and then come back and resubmit. So the benefit of doing it with one of our trusted editors, of course, is that they can be in a pipeline to publication. But I really try to be mindful and transparent, not to require anything, because I think it's just a very fraught space, around money and what people think we're forcing on them, which is really nothing. We're saying it has to be high quality enough, and these are the measures that you need to meet, and we will provide those services. And so I saw that someone asked, what percentage do we accept? And on the track 1, I would say the average is probably like between 8 and 10% of all submissions land in the track 1, like they're ready to go. And lots of times those authors have been shopping their manuscript traditionally for a really long time. They may already be agented. They've been through multiple edits. And so one of the questions in our submissions field is, please tell us about the backstory of this book. Has it been professionally edited? What does that look like? And I always say to authors who are onboarding with us, this is a collaboration. Neither one of us is trying to pull the wool over one another's eyes. We need this book to be the best that it can be. And so let's talk about the editorial strategy with that in mind, so that no one is coming back in your reviews and being like, wow, the plot totally fell apart. We have the same goal to make the book as good as it can be.
One of my happiest moments as a writing coach was, Lucy Rose has her book coming out with you guys soon, The Journalist. She's going to also be a guest on the Memoir Association. And she got, I forgot which track it was, but she, we'd been working on it for a while, so that it was that you guys accepted it right away. It was one of my,
yes.
Yes, that was a glorious moment, and the heavens parted.
And that's what I'm saying, people who have the wherewithal to work with someone like you before they come and submit is really my dream as a publisher as well. Because if someone uses us, which they can, to be like, I'm going to check and see if my book is ready, but I've never worked with an editor before, we're going to give them honest feedback and say, you have a ways to go, and you can work with a coach or you can work with an editor. But that does need to happen. And to Jennifer's point, that needs to be part of the expenses that authors factor into their publishing path.
And then I see there's a question that I think I can take this one. So distinguish between a book coach and a book shepherd. I think Jennifer and I together make a whole path. We make a yin-yangy thing. So I really, a lot of people, someone mentioned that, you can just put a shingle out and call yourself a book coach or writing coach. So be really careful, when you're selecting someone, because it can be costly, and you want to make sure that you're really getting quality. So a book coach, a writing coach, is going to help you, help you hone your main idea, help you with the structure and the flow, get it to a place where it can be seen professionally. And then a book Sherpa is that's what I call Jennifer, is somebody who's going to help you take that finished product and make it into an actual book. So that's the way that we differentiate those two things. Anastasia, did you have a question?
Well, I see there's a couple of other questions coming in, but one of them was about publicity. And I know that for hybrid, well, actually, it could go to all four of you because I'm not sure about traditional publishing, how much publicity now they get with traditional, author gets with traditional publishing. How much does a normal publicity package cost for an author putting out a book? Let's just say a novel or a memoir right about now.
Let's start with Annie.
No, I don't handle publicity myself. I have, sometimes my authors will say to me, I'm looking for a publicist. Who do you recommend? Here are some people who I have in mind. And so that has sort of been my experience with publicists. I remember, trying to remember offhand, I think it was about $15,000 or $12,000 he ended up paying. For the
and do traditional publishers now offer publicity for first-time authors? I mean, like the old-fashioned book tour and things of that sort?
They do some. I mean, and what that sum is, it varies book to book, publisher to publisher. I think I've had a bunch of traditionally published authors who have done book tours that has been paid for by the publisher. But not everyone, sometimes the author has to cover all the costs themselves. And so it really, really varies.
What about you, Brooke and Hollie and Jennifer? What's your experience with the
as I mentioned, publicity is not included in what we do. And so we have recommended publicists that have worked with our authors before. And that's, we have an author handbook that we give, and there's a long section on publicity. And so those publicists charge, on the low end at this point, $7,500 is the packages that I see that are the smallest. And on the high end, I mean, if someone's going to hire a publicist for like a whole year, which sometimes people do, that can be $30,000. People have to understand that a publicist is working like a number of hours. So if you have sticker shock, look at the hours, and then like really think about, what am I paying this person an hourly rate? Because it's usually, in my experience, about $100 an hour. And so if you're like, $30,000, but you're choosing the hours that person's working. So I think most of our authors, the sweet spot is $10,000 that they end up choosing as a publicity package cost. So to Jennifer's point, that puts them right at that solid kind of $20,000 number. Once you add the publicity. And I do personally recommend that people hire publicists if they hope for their books to sell, because what we do a really effective job with distribution, as I mentioned, and we can push the books into bookstores, and we can get the books into all these accounts, libraries, and elsewhere. But that is the extent of the distribution. It goes there, and in order to sell through, for books to actually sell, there does need to be some kind of publicity and marketing campaign behind that. So publicity and distribution, though, they also work hand in hand. And so for authors who have zero publicity campaign with She Writes, I will say to them, we're not going to push out as many titles. We're not going to print as many, because you don't have the force behind it to merit publishing 2,000 books, for instance, if you have no publicity campaign attached to it.
Mm-hmm. And I would just add to that, if you don't have that kind of money ahead of time to put into your first book, to wait until you're on your third or your fourth book. If you are looking to build a long-term career as a writer, put your time and energy into getting a good book out there, and then getting another good book out there, and then getting another good book out there. And then when you put money into an expensive publicity campaign, $10,000, $20,000, you're not just going to be selling that one book. That book will sell your other books. So you also want to have a game plan in mind if this is a business to you and not just a single book. If you are somebody that's building a career that your book is there to help you with your career because you're selling it to do speaking engagements, then maybe you want to do a publicity campaign early on, because really what you're looking for is to be able to say, I appeared on CNN, I appeared on local Fox News. And by saying that you did that, you have more credibility to get speaking engagements and make money that way. So PR is important, but it's something you really want to think about and do at the right time for the right reasons.
I just want to make a brief counterpoint to that, only because this sort of speaks to how complicated this is and how every author is unique and every genre is unique. Because like if you have a series, your first book is the most important, you know, so I just want to put that out there, because in the world that I'm in traditional distribution, if your first book is a flop or a failure, that is your track for the rest of your publishing career.
Oh, wow.
And so it's just to say, like, depending on the genre and depending on the author, I might argue the opposite, to put as much money into your first publicity campaign as possible and then less money as you go. And then I totally agree with Hollie's point about the future books selling the first books. Mm-hmm. But one of the biggest mistakes I see authors making, especially when they have series, is just going, well, I'll just see what happens with this one. And then the second book and the third book don't have a chance because they never gave the first book the best effort that they could. So when you're talking to experts, just make sure that you are saying, like, is this true for my genre? And I think it's a complicated thing about panels like this, because we're talking to so many different kinds of authors, and sometimes you are particularly siloed in like the advice that you're going to get depending on your genre.
Is it genre specific, do you think, where someone should go, what type of publishing they should choose?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just made the point earlier that I think for the authors I work with, who are largely memoirists and novelists, that traditional distribution and traditional reviews give them a lot of advantages. That's all, you know, and it doesn't mean that it's the right path for them at all. I think it's a very individual experience. But I do maintain that it matters for those authors much more than it would matter for like a self-help or a leadership book. Mm-hmm. Because it's a different, you know, those traditional reviews, getting a PW or a Kirkus or a book list or whatever, that moves library sales. Mm. You know, and this world is very, you know, in terms of like when things take off, those things matter more for certain genres over others.
Yeah. Another thing I was wondering about is, where do you see the landscape? This is really for anyone to answer. What do you see that's going on in front of us? With what's going on with the world? Are you noticing any trends? How do you see the landscape right now? How has it shifted?
You mean in terms of just the publishing landscape in general, or?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that part of what this panel has evidenced is that the definition of publishing is getting broader and broader in terms of the different avenues that authors have available to them. Mm-hmm. You know, 20, 30 years ago, we wouldn't have had this panel because hybrid publishing wouldn't have existed, and indie publishing was still in some of the earlier stages then. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there, you know, ends up being more sort of gradations in between all these different things already. I don't know what that will be, but
good point.
You know, why not?
Yeah,
I think it is getting better for writers. I'm so sorry to step on you, Brooke. Oh. Yeah, I think all these different options and all this knowledge that is now available to writers is giving them so many more opportunities to get good work out there. It is not being funneled through one, you know, Wizard of Oz who's in charge of everything behind the curtains. There's all these options now. And so if you are a good writer, you can get your work out there and build a career for yourself. You don't have to go through a single gatekeeper.
Right. And I was going to say, and even if you're a bad writer, you can get your work out there, right?
Well, we see that too. That's true.
Well, and that's why it's so important to start a community, to have beta readers, to hire professionals, and make sure your book is the best it can be. Because, you know, we all have a different process, but I agree. I think it's really exciting. Like what is happening right now is really exciting. It's lonely being in quarantine, but by the same token, it's like making the world even bigger. Like I've been telling people for years that you can reach out and touch anyone on this globe and promote your book. That's a whole planet that may need your book. And here we're finally realizing, oh yeah, it's okay. Technology is really not that scary. So I think people are realizing that they have more ability and more courage than they ever had before to step over that threshold and get their book out into the world. And, to Hollie's point, there's so many tools. There's so many organizations. I mean, a San Diego Writers Festival, that's why we're here. It's because storytelling matters and you can get your story out into the world. Hopefully you'll do it well.
We have a few more Facebook questions if you guys wouldn't mind sticking around. One of them is, should a publicist be engaged or approached before getting the book published? And publicity panel is coming up, but I don't know if you guys want to
say 2:30. We're having a publicity panel. We have an amazing panel.
Hold that thought.
It's a good transition.
It really is. Yeah.
Well,
I saw Brooke nodding when you asked the question.
And also, I would
like
from Brooke too about what you see in the current landscape. I'm real curious.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. Honestly, I think so many things. I agree with what everyone said super much, and I think more people are writing because they have time and space, and so in terms of people's curiosity about this industry, I think it's at an all-time high. And the reason that Ingram's printing process is so tremendously slow down right now is because so many people are publishing. And so like they went from turning books around in less than a week to like 6 weeks, and that is sheer volume. People are just writing and publishing the hell out of all kinds of stuff right now. And I think that's super exciting. I also think that it is leveling the playing field in some ways. We saw traditional publishing do a major knee-jerk reaction, push books out. I think that they made some mistakes that indies were a little bit more nimble and didn't quite fall for. And so that's interesting. I also think we're having a major moment of reckoning on the race front, which is not what this panel is about, but
importance nonetheless. Yes,
it's like in terms of what we're going through right now as an industry, there is some major shakeups happening. And all of that started, of course, like well before this year, but 2020 with everything on the landscape, like we're just going to start to see a lot of shakeup, and I think it's long overdue. And so it's kind of a disrupting, exciting, upsetting
all of that,
to be in publishing.
But as they say, change is hard, but it's usually good for the better.
Absolutely. And people, I would say the other trend is just more audiobooks. And I think that's because people are wanting to consume content in lots of different ways. So that is the fastest growing segment in the book publishing industry right now, which I think is great. And most of our authors want to do audio or do audio. So yeah, lots of things. I mean, this industry is like, for anybody who's just a watcher, like this is a fascinating industry to be in. No matter if you choose to be indie or traditional or whatever, like educating yourself about what's going on in the industry is a good thing.
So as we're wrapping up, I'm wondering, let's say somebody's out there watching right now and wondering, how do I know that I'm ready to go to Annie or ready to go to Hollie, ready to go to Jennifer, ready to go to Brooke? What makes me know I'm ready to take that step?
Shown into honest beta readers.
Yeah, there you go,
just
Hollie.
Take that step and then you find out.
Well, I think part of it is starting with your goals. Where do you really want to be? And Annie, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, I would say number one, you should have done multiple rounds of editing on your own. It shouldn't be your first draft of anything.
Agreed.
And I mean, if you can share it with someone, whether it's beta readers, whether you're part of a writing group, there are some conferences that do like critiques, paid critiques with professionals. As long as you have other people reading it who aren't just your friends and your mother, who are giving you feedback and you're trying to incorporate it, and possibly you could also hire a freelance editor to do some sort of critique for you as well. So I would say definitely get feedback from other people. And as close as you can come to getting feedback from people who work professionally in publishing, probably the more likely you are to get feedback that's going to help you get published.
Yeah,
Right.
anecdotally, I just had someone who sent me his manuscript, and he said, my wife loves it, my friends love it, but I really need an honest assessment. And unfortunately, when I read it, I was like, wow, you need to take writing classes. Like, that's how off the perception was, so it's so important that you subject yourself to critical feedback if you really want to make a go at this, and like check your ego at the door, and learn how to write, learn how to tell a story, hire people like Marnie and, other people who are developmental editors. And it's super important.
There's a funny saying, which is just because you're exhausted doesn't mean you're done.
That's so true.
Boy, is that true. Yeah.
I like that.
I have a children's book author I'm working with right now. He's a wonderful storyteller, and he brought us a 3,000 word manuscript picture book, and it's a lovely story, and he's gotten amazing feedback, but guess what? It's too long and it's not ready, but he's been so good about listening to the feedback and being like, okay, we got to cut another 500 words, get that down to 1,000. So if the author's willing to listen, it's hard when it's your baby and you've been working on this for 20 years sometimes. Like, to hear someone say it's not ready, it's hard, but you have to be ready to hear that because you want your book to be successful. I mean, that's what we all have in common, is we want these books to be successful. We want to get them out into the world. We're not just doing this, just to put out books. That's not the point. So, listening and joining those organizations and getting those beta readers is critical.